You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get to the news over the past couple of days, and that is that Syracuse football landed its fifth player in the class of 2026, and it's Delaware wide receiver BJ Garrett. He verbally committed to Syracuse. Garrett is 6'3", 175-pound wide receiver, and right now, if you look on 24/7 Sports, he is the highest rated player in Syracuse's 2026 class, but it depends on how you look at it, because offensive tackle Javion Cooper is a 24/7 Sports composite 4-star recruit, and he's also a Rivals 4-star recruit. But if you're just solely looking at the 24/7 Sports rankings, not the composite, just the regular 24/7 Sports, BJ Garrett is number 1 and Cooper is number 2. So depending on how you look at it, honestly, BJ Garrett is either the best player or the second best player in Syracuse's 2025 recruiting class. And by the way, it should be noted that BJ Garrett is the second highest rated player in the state of Delaware. So kudos to Syracuse football. Delaware not necessarily known for being a football recruiting hotbed, but at the same time, you want to be able to maximize those states. Really, the word is monopolize them. Get the best players from each state, because there's still talent in pretty much every state around the country. So it's still good to get the second best player in Delaware. As far as offer competition is concerned, he held offers from schools like Duke, Rutgers, Maryland, Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. And based on the competition, I think this is a nice recruiting win for Syracuse football. Garrett is a Northeast kid. We've heard Fran Brown talk a lot about how it's very important that Syracuse football recruits well in the Northeast, because it's much easier to convince a kid from Delaware to attend Syracuse than it is to tell a kid from Georgia to attend Syracuse. You see my point? It's very important to recruit from the Northeast, as Fran Brown says. And so getting a Northeast kid holding off programs like Rutgers and Pittsburgh is a big deal. Also holding off ACC schools like Duke, Pitt, and Virginia Tech, that's important as well. So this is a nice recruiting win for Fran Brown and Syracuse, getting a guy like BJ Garrett. And don't worry, we're going to get to the scouting report in just a moment. But I want to point this out. I think we all want, most of you guys who are watching or listening to this podcast are Syracuse fans. You want Syracuse to sit at the big boy table. You want them to be in on these 5 stars, these 4-star players, right? And Syracuse with Fran Brown has done that at times. We saw them get in 2025 4-star consensus Demetrius Samuel. They also held off Michigan for the number 1 player in New York in 2025. Quante Gillians, a defensive lineman, is his name. I believe that's how you say it. But it's very hard, let's be honest, for a program like Syracuse to consistently sit at the big boy table. It's hard. You're going up against those big-time programs like Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. It's not exactly easy to sit there, right? In order for Syracuse to have sustained solid recruiting, as we have seen under Fran Brown, and we will get to realistic, obtainable goals later on in the podcast. But Fran Brown so far has done a nice job of at least getting Syracuse to be a slightly above average recruiting team in the ACC. And he's doing it simply by recruiting in his backyard. And occasionally he'll get a 4-star player to commit, but if he gets a 3-star, he's okay with getting a higher rated 3-star and holding off ACC competition. So overall, this is a nice, solid recruiting win for Syracuse football. Now let's get to the scouting report of BJ Garrett, okay? And I really like BJ Garrett. Here is what Garrett has said about himself when describing himself as a player. I'll paraphrase it for you all. He describes himself as a strong route runner with a strong route tree, and he has a great catch radius. Now, I also went back and I watched his highlights on 24/7 Sports. I watched them, and highlights can be a little bit misleading. Remember that these are some of the best athletes in high school, so when they're going up against high school competition, they're going to look good. They're going to look like insert your favorite NFL wide receiver, because these guys are just so much better than the competition they're going up against. So I tried to look carefully, and he's pretty much spot on about himself. He's not lying about who he is. He can leave defenders in the dust, obviously, with his speed in high school. He's got good route running, and he can go out and make those tough catches if a quarterback makes an inaccurate throw. That's what a good catch radius is all about. My player comparison, it's actually kind of freaky because they both have a very similar frame. They're both 6'3", 170-ish pounds. My player comp for BJ Garrett is actually Daryl Gill, a current Syracuse wide receiver who took a nice step last year and I think could take a bigger step in 2025. I already mentioned that they have similar build, but if you think of a guy like Daryl Gill, he's a versatile outside wide receiver. He's got nice hands. He's a strong route runner. He can run after the catch. He can take the top off the defense. Basically, he can do a little bit of everything. When I watched BJ Garrett on 24/7 Sports, some of his highlight tape, it looked pretty similar to Daryl Gill. If you watched his tape, feel free to let me know your player comp in the comments section below. But that's what I got from it. And I tried to be somewhat realistic. I saw someone online compare him to Andre Johnson. I think that's a little bit unfair. Andre Johnson is a Hall of Fame NFL wide receiver. So I said Daryl Gill. He looks kind of like Daryl Gill. And they have the exact same frame, ironically.